Hello and welcome into this week's episode of the Everyday Strength Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Higley. Today's episode is episode number 2 of the mini-series on programming. And what we're going to talk about is macrocycles, mesocycles, microcycles, and more so the timing structure of a training program. So a lot of times whenever we think about training, we think about the progress that comes from what you do today. But the truth is that it comes from how your training fits together and pieces together over the course of weeks, months, years, layering training on top of each other, that consistency that you hear everyone talking about. And so today we're going to talk through that blueprint and kind of dive into how cycles and training build on each other and how you should be able to methodically go from one cycle to the next to hit that end goal that we want to discuss. Without structure, training is random. But with structure, even an average training session or what you perceive to be an average training session can ultimately move you closer toward your clear goal. And this is how training fits together over time. So first off, let's start by defining macrocycle. Macrocycle is the full year of training, how you build the full year. It's your long-range plan, usually 6 to 12 months, 12 months being the most common there. This is where you answer the questions of what are the key seasons of the year? What are the key phases? Do we have events that we want to layer on throughout the year? Do we want to do a race in April? Do we want to do a HYROX event over the summer? Do we want to prep for a bodybuilding show in December? What are the kind of the key peaking moments of the year? And then from there, what's the primary goal of those? What's the primary goal right now? What is coming later? Whenever you look at Olympic athletes, they are training over the course of 4 years, not just 1 year. They're training for one singular event that matters more than anything else on their training calendar, on their competition calendar. If we look at elite professional cyclists that are going to race in the Tour de France, they're training most often, they're training for that one race. That is their A race. They might have B races throughout the year. They might have C races throughout the year, but their A race, their entire 12-month plan revolves around that Tour de France. Now, you as an everyday athlete, you may not have key events like that. You most likely don't. Some of you do compete. Some of you like to enter into the competitive field from here and there. But oftentimes we don't have a key event. So how do we create our key events? Ultimately, what you need to be aware of is that you can't chase everything all at once. I love to talk about being strong and having adequate muscle mass and being extremely well conditioned. But I know full well that it's not possible to train those all the time and be constantly training each layer to its best ability. If you are training hypertrophy, your conditioning has to come down. If you're training conditioning, then your strength work has to come down. Doesn't mean that you can't continue to train these. It's just your focus has to shift. And so with a macrocycle, with this 12-month or longer or shorter, but this long-term training plan, that's what gives you that long-term direction. It's not rigid, but it's a direction of how the training year is going to progress. And then we'll work backward from there. Now, life will bend this. Things will pop up. Trips will pop up. Illness will pop up. Injuries. But it keeps you from program hopping. It gives you direction so that when you go into the gym, you know what you're working towards. And you know what you need to achieve to get you closer to that end goal that you're looking to achieve. Now, a typical macro cycle phase starts with that base, that foundation. Let's do the grunt work. Let's build the capacity. Let's build the strength, the required strength that's needed. Or let's build the aerobic base that's needed. And then let's move into our second phase, which is the build. This is a little bit more specific. It's a little bit more focused. During that base or foundation, we can do more cross training. If we're a runner or if we're a lifter, we can start to do, other types of movements, other types of exercise, other types of training. But the build starts to get a little bit more specific, where we're focusing on efforts on what is the primary goal of that phase. And then we have the peak that follows, the intensification phase. This is where all of our focus, all of our specificity falls on this goal. Everything else takes a true back seat. And then we have our maintenance phases. We have our deload phases. We have our transition phases, what some may call an off season or reset. But whenever we tie in life stresses, right? Macrocycles can flex around life seasons. We can plug in holidays. We can plug in the travel time that we know we have. We can plug in times when we know we're busy at work, or when we have more birthdays, or when we have more family obligations that come up. We can, whenever we're sitting down on January 1st, when we're writing out our next 12 months, these are things that we can look at and know that we need to adjust. One thing that I do from personal experience is I know I take a vacation in the summer. I know I take 7 days off from training. I know that I have traveling for academic conferences. And I know that my training has to shift. And so I will make dedicated time that's a deload that week, or that's a dip in my training. Sometimes you can plan ahead. You can see what the hotel has to offer in terms of a gym. You can look and see what food options are available, but sometimes you just don't have that luxury. And so baking in the deloads during those times is a great way to start to build out what your year looks like. And starting with the macro, starting with that annual plan, that lets you build realistic expectations. Now, the second phase or time structure that we'll talk through is the mesocycle. This is what we would often term the training block, where we're focusing more on those specific things. So whenever I talked about the base, that would be a potential mesocycle, or maybe 2 or 3 mesocycles. Whenever I talk about the build, that may be a mesocycle. Whenever I talk about the peaking, that's a mesocycle. This is where the actual change is happening during these mesocycles. It's a concentrated training block where you focus on developing that one specific ability or set of abilities. Each mesocycle typically lasts anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks. The purpose of these is to drive that specific adaptation, whether it's strength, hypertrophy, threshold work, aerobic base work, etc. The progress of these training variables is done in a very logical sequence. So here we're keeping our training fresh. We're introducing new stimulus, but we're not program hopping. Now, what, again, do you as the everyday athlete need to know about mesocycles? This is where you should judge your progress in that 3 to 6 week period. A lot of times we want to test before and at the end of a mesocycle, because we can directly measure the impact of what those last 3 to 6 weeks did in terms of changing our abilities and our performance. Mesocycles also give you a short-term focus without the long-term direction. 12 months is a long time, but you can do anything for 3 weeks. You can do anything for 6 weeks. So the consistency across the mesocycle is much more important than perfection in any single given workout. If you sit down at the end of the day and you check off that you were programmed to do 20 workouts and you did 18, 19, whatever it may be, that's where you win. It doesn't look at the full year. It looks at what have you done lately? How consistent have you been? There's some really great examples here that you could have a 4-week block where you're building squat strength or deadlift strength. Maybe a 3-week block looking at building aerobic capacity. Maybe a longer 5-week block where you're developing hypertrophy, and then you shift into that strength or power mesocycle. If you're an athlete or you have events on your calendar, you may have a preseason intensification block to develop that power and that speed. Now, again, high stress life seasons, we'll choose more accumulation blocks rather than the aggressive intensity of a peaking block. our low stress seasons, the winter months when there's not a whole lot, right? That's a great time for that intensification. And then that brings us to our microcycle. Microcycle is the week, maybe 10 days. Some people will choose to do 10-day microcycles, but a microcycle is a short-term, what is happening in the moment. This is the operational level of what most people think of programming. Microcycle is your week of training where you decide what days you lift, what days you condition, what days you rest and recover, and what sessions pair well together. What sessions pair well together, and then also follow other sessions appropriately. So the microcycle questions to answer is, what is the theme of each day? This is big picture, broad image here. Is it squat day? Is it lower body day, right? Is it a run day? Okay. The other question is, how many hard sessions per week do you want to plug in? Where does stress fit around life, your work, your family? And how much recovery is realistic and how much recovery is needed? So the goal with the microcycle isn't to hit every day perfectly, same thing as before, but it's to hit most of the week consistently. They should be flexible, they should be adaptive, and they should be human. If you are programmed, I've talked about this before, if you are programmed to do 4 days and you can't, and you can't do it consistently because you just can't find the time to do it, or you are constantly being called into meetings, or you're constantly having traffic issues and you can't get to the gym. That's where a 3-day-a-week split is better than a 4-day-a-week split. Maybe you're constantly missing your lower body days because a lot of people, for whatever reason, don't like to train lower body. Let's just start to implement full body training. That way you can't miss it, right? It's part of the workout. It's already been programmed for you and you're going to hit it. So now what's the model for all this? How do the 3 layers interact with each other? So big picture, the macrocycle. This is the direction. This is immediately where you're going in the long term. What's on the horizon for you? The mesocycle is the method, the focus phase that moves you toward the goal you are trying to achieve. And then the microcycle is the execution. You're stacking microcycles week after week after week after week, and now you have a mesocycle. And then you do that mesocycle after mesocycle after mesocycle. Now you have your microcycle. So if you miss a day, the microcycle can adjust. If you have a rough week, the mesocycle can absorb it. But if life hits you hard, you get injured, things are really popping up that are taking away training, and it does that for a month, that's where the macrocycle keeps you from derailing because you know what's next and you have it programmed and you have it built out. You may need to adjust, but you know what you need to do in the long term. The more you zoom out, the calmer and more in control you feel. You're not walking into the gym and writing your program or your workout for the day in the lobby of the gym. You did it months in advance and you know what has to happen. Now with that, there's a trap of planning with obsession where you get so into the details that you start to overwhelm yourself. I've been there, especially as you go through and really try to build a good, solid program that looks great on paper, that has everything you want to do. You can start to layer on exercises after exercises, movements after movements, difficulty just for the sake of difficulty. And ultimately it's too much. The other option is just having no plan at all. So structure gives you that clarity. Your flexibility gives you longevity. And your consistency gives you results. Questions that you can ask yourself to know, is this working? Is this effective? Did I win the week? Did I complete the block? And am I still moving towards my goals that I set forth at the beginning of this macrocycle, at the beginning of this year? Instead of, was today perfect? Should I have done a front squat whenever I did an SSB squat? Maybe I shouldn't have ran on Tuesday because it follows a lower body day. Maybe I should have bench pressed instead. Ultimately, did you win the week? Did you complete the block? And am I still moving towards this year's goal? That is what's most important. Are you being consistent? Progress is the sum of weeks and the sum of months and the sum of years, not the sum of 1 or 2 workouts. Now, a couple of different scenarios, different examples that I have that I'd like to present, because there's different people who have different requirements when it comes to developing their programming. So the first is the dad, the parent who has 3 kids. They work a full-time job, 9 to 5. What is their program? What does their timeline look like? So from their macrocycle, they have goals of being lean and being strong and being aerobically fit. So with a mesocycle for them, we'll program 4-week strength or hypertrophy blocks with some conditioning blocks tied in, where we kind of put, the strength and hypertrophy work on the back seat, and we focus on the aerobic system. And we'll structure their training very simply. We might hit Monday, Wednesday, Friday, full body lifting. Tuesday and Saturday, we do conditioning. Other days can be rest, or they can be optional runs, optional workouts. If stress or disturbances hit mid-block, then we can adjust the intensity and try to keep the frequency there. Maybe we combine the conditioning onto a lifting day, because they can get to the gym 3 days a week. So let's add an extra 15, 20 minutes at the end of your workout to do some conditioning work. The second scenario is a competitive HYROX athlete that's preparing for a fall race. Here they have a more defined macrocycle where we're going to build the aerobic system, build that foundation. We're going to peak for a mesocycle, and we'll have that race. And then we're going to have a programmed transition. We're going to have a plan in place for as soon as they finish that race. The next 2 to 4 weeks are already structured. There's no second guessing. A mesocycle for them may be a 4-week threshold development work. And they might do threshold runs on Tuesdays, long runs on Saturdays, and they might hit strength Monday, Wednesday, Friday, doing full body again. Now with this individual, do they have high work stress? If so, then maybe threshold runs become tempo runs. We cut that intensity once again. We keep the structure. They have no problem getting to the gym. We keep that in place, but we just modify the dose a bit. And the third is someone who program hops. This is your typical gym goer. If I'm frank, most people at a commercial gym have zero idea what they're doing when they walk in the door. Unless you're working with a quality personal trainer, quality strength coach, a lot of times people are guessing. They're seeing what piece of equipment is open. I'm going to go do that. Or I saw a YouTube video where they did this. I'm going to go do that. So Macrocycle for them fixes that direction. It doesn't need to be as defined as it does for the hybrid athlete, but it needs to have what is occurring in this 4-week span. What is occurring month to month? We can use a mesocycle to fix the focus and put key things in place for that individual. And then the microcycle, whenever that's written out in full, we've got a really solid training program for that week. That removes the decision fatigue. They don't have to worry about wondering what they're going to do when they get to the gym. They don't have to stress about, am I going to squat today or am I going to bench press? Like if you're asking those questions going to the gym, you're well behind the 8 ball. So now to bring this all home, right? How does this set up the rest of the series? So future episodes are going to plug into this exact model. So we're going to talk about reps. We're going to talk about sets. We're going to talk about the strength training methods of conjugate. We've already talked about conditioning in detail, but we will hit on that again. But ultimately, we want you to understand where the other nuts and bolts of training fit within the time structure, fit within the macrocycles, the mesos, the micros, and ultimately create a map for every training discussion going forward. So again, to round this out, for anyone who's training, consistency across time is going to deliver better results than inconsistency. Or consistency across time is going to deliver better results than one single workout alone. Because at the end of the day, great training programs are not built day to day. They're built over the course of seasons. When you zoom out and when you see the architecture, the training stops becoming random and starts to become inevitable. You know what's going to happen and you're going to get in and do it. So thanks for listening to the Everyday Strength Podcast. If today's episode helped you learn something, do me a favor and make sure you're subscribed on YouTube, Apple Podcast, or Spotify. This helps the show grow and it ensures that you never miss an episode. If you're on YouTube, drop a comment. I read all of them. And if you're on Apple or Spotify, then a quick 5-star review goes a long way in pushing this information to more people. If you want to go deeper, then join the Performance Edge Network. It's free to join and it gets you access to my weekly newsletter, which is full of training breakdowns, physiology deep dives, and tools that you can apply immediately to become a stronger, fitter, higher performing everyday athlete. And if you're ready for structured programming, then I've got options for whatever path you're on. The Peak Performance Training Program is my flagship strength and conditioning program. And I also offer Peak 3X, which is a 3-day per week version for busier athletes, along with other programs designed for hybrid competitors, runners, and anyone who wants to train like an athlete year-round. You can find all those and more at HagleyStrength.com. I appreciate you being here, keep training hard, and I'll see you in the next episode.